My name is Garrett Wilson, and at 32 years old I returned from the dead. At least that's what my family thought. My brother Mason had told everyone I vanished during my humanitarian work overseas. He grieved publicly, consoled our mother, and pocketed my inheritance. For 3 years he built his life on my absence. Then I walked into my mother's wedding reception. The gasps were audible. The champagne glass in Mason's hand shattered on the floor. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and subscribe to hear how I expose the truth. I grew up in suburban Connecticut, in a beautiful colonial house with a perfectly manicured lawn. That house represented everything about our upper-middle-class life. My father, Richard Wilson, built his construction business from scratch, working tirelessly to provide for us. My mother Sandra was the emotional core of our family, always ready with warm cookies and warmer hugs. We were the picture-perfect American family, at least on the surface. Mason and I were only 2 years apart, but the gap between us seemed much wider. From the beginning, he struggled to find his place. I excelled in school without trying much, while he studied late into the night just to maintain B's. When I joined the track team in high school, I broke the school record in my first season. Mason tried football, baseball, and eventually joined track too, but never quite found his footing in athletics. "You're just like your father," Mom would tell me, beaming with pride. I didn't notice how Mason's smile would tighten whenever she said it. Dad's construction company grew into a regional powerhouse by the time I finished college with my engineering degree. Mason dropped out after 2 years at community college, claiming he wanted to be an entrepreneur instead. His first 3 business ventures failed within months. A car detailing service, an app development company, and a fitness coaching business all collapsed under mismanagement. Meanwhile, I joined a prestigious engineering firm and quickly rose through the ranks. The summer I turned 26, Dad suffered a massive heart attack while inspecting a construction site. It happened so suddenly, no one had time to prepare. Mom fell apart at the funeral, clinging to both of us as she sobbed through the service. I held her up on one side, Mason on the other. That day, I saw a different side of my brother. He seemed genuinely devastated, and for once, we connected through our shared grief. Dad's will was straightforward. The family business, valued at approximately $3 million, would be split equally between Mason and me. His investment portfolio, worth another $2 million, would also be divided evenly. Mom would keep the house and receive monthly payments from the business profits. Dad had built everything with careful planning, ensuring we would all be taken care of. "Your brother needs this opportunity," Mom told me privately after the will reading. "He's struggled so long. Maybe this is his chance to prove himself." I agreed without hesitation. Mason had always lived in my shadow, and I genuinely wanted him to succeed. What I didn't know then was that he was already drowning in debt. Credit cards, online gambling, a failed relationship that ended with his girlfriend Vanessa taking half his possessions. The inheritance wasn't just an opportunity for him. It was salvation. After Dad's death, Mom sank into a deep depression. I would visit daily, bringing groceries and making sure she ate. Mason moved back home temporarily, claiming he wanted to support her. Looking back, I should have noticed how he subtly isolated her, suggesting her friends were too busy with their own lives to be bothered. He would screen her calls, deciding who got through to speak with her. "Mom's fragile right now," he explained when I questioned him. "She doesn't need people draining her energy." I was too consumed with managing the business transition to see the manipulation clearly. Dad had wanted us to run the company together, but Mason had little interest in the day-to-day operations. Instead, he convinced me to buy out his share of the business, promising to pursue other investments with the capital. I agreed, taking on additional loans to pay him out fairly. My focus remained on preserving Dad's legacy while continuing my own engineering career. About a year after Dad's death, Mom joined a grief support group at the community center. That's where she met Timothy Brooks, a kind widower whose wife had passed away from cancer 2 years prior. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in Mom's well-being. The first time she laughed again was during a story about Timothy's attempt to cook pasta that ended with fire alarms blaring. As Mom slowly emerged from her grief, I began exploring opportunities to use my engineering skills for humanitarian projects. An organization called Engineers Without Borders contacted me about a water purification project in a remote region of Southeast Asia. The 6-month assignment would help bring clean water to villages suffering from contamination issues. It felt like the perfect way to honor Dad's belief in giving back to those in need. Mason surprisingly encouraged the idea. "You've always wanted to make a difference," he said, helping me research the region. "Mom's doing better now, especially with Timothy around. This is your chance." The night before my departure, we had a special family dinner. Mom prepared all my favorites, fussing over every detail. Timothy joined us, bringing an expensive bottle of wine to toast my journey. Mason seemed unusually attentive, asking detailed questions about my communication plans. "The villages have limited internet access," I explained. "But I'll call whenever I can, and I've set up emergency contacts through the organization." "Promise you'll call weekly," Mom insisted, gripping my hand across the table. "I don't care what time zone you're in." "I promise," I assured her, not realizing how impossible that promise would become. Mason drove me to the airport the next morning. As we pulled up to the international terminal, he gave me an uncharacteristically tight hug. "Take care of yourself out there," he said. "And don't worry about anything here. I'll handle everything." Those words would echo in my mind for years to come. At the security checkpoint, I called Mom one last time. Mason was mysteriously present at her house, taking the phone to wish me well before I boarded. Looking back, I should have questioned why he was there at 7 in the morning. But I was focused on the journey ahead, blissfully unaware that I was walking into a nightmare of my brother's creation. The flight to Southeast Asia took nearly 20 hours with connections. I arrived exhausted but excited, meeting the local project coordinator at the airport. Jackson Chen had been working with Engineers Without Borders for 5 years and quickly briefed me on the drive to our remote location. "The village has about 400 people," he explained as our jeep bounced along unpaved roads. "The water source became contaminated after a mining company began operations nearby. Your filtration system designs could change everything for them." The village exceeded my expectations despite its poverty. Children ran alongside our vehicle, waving enthusiastically. Elders welcomed us with a traditional ceremony. I was given a small hut near the community center, simple but comfortable enough. The first 2 weeks were productive beyond belief. My designs adapted well to the local materials, and we made rapid progress on the filtration system. I called Mom twice during those initial weeks, describing the beautiful landscape and warm community. Mason answered the first call, explaining that Mom was napping. During the second call, I spoke with her briefly before the connection failed. I sent several emails afterward with photos attached, unaware they would never reach their destination. On the 17th day, disaster struck without warning. Heavy monsoon rains had been falling for days, but the experienced locals weren't concerned. Then, shortly after midnight, I awoke to shouts and the terrifying sound of rushing water. A flash flood was tearing through the village, the nearby river having jumped its banks after an upstream dam partially collapsed. I grabbed my waterproof backpack with my passport and essential documents, then ran outside to help. The water was already knee-deep and rising fast. Jackson and I helped evacuate families to higher ground, carrying children and elderly villagers through the powerful current. During the third rescue trip, I slipped on submerged debris while carrying a young boy to safety. The current instantly pulled me downstream, smashing me against rocks and fallen trees. I managed to push the child to another rescuer before being swept away completely. The world became a chaotic blur of water, pain, and darkness. A fallen tree struck my head, and everything went black. I woke up 2 days later in a rural clinic 30 miles from the village. A local fisherman had pulled me from the river, barely alive. My left leg was broken in 2 places. 3 ribs were cracked. The gash on my head required 20 stitches. But worst of all, everything I owned was gone. My passport, wallet, phone, and laptop had all been swept away in the flood. I was alive but completely cut off from my former life. The clinic had no internet connection and unreliable electricity from a small generator. The doctor, an overworked man named Ryan Morris, spoke limited English. Through broken conversations, I learned the village had been devastated. Several people had died, and all communication infrastructure was destroyed. "You very lucky," Ryan told me, checking my bandages. "River usually kill people in flood." My recovery took weeks. The broken leg required a crude cast with locally available materials. Pain medication was limited to basic analgesics that barely took the edge off. Each day, I asked about contacting the American embassy or finding a working phone. Each day, Ryan explained that the roads were still impassable due to flooding and landslides. "Maybe 2 months, roads open again," he would say, gesturing toward the window where rain continued to fall. As my strength returned, I tried to make myself useful in the clinic, helping organize supplies and translating for the occasional English-speaking patient. I gradually learned phrases in the local language, enough to express basic needs and understand simple conversations. After 6 weeks, a supply truck finally made it through to the clinic. The driver agreed to take me to the provincial capital where communications might be possible. The journey took 14 hours on muddy, partially collapsed roads. Every bump sent shooting pain through my still healing leg. The provincial capital was chaotic, filled with displaced people from dozens of flood-affected villages. The government building where I hoped to find help was overwhelmed with local citizens seeking assistance. I waited 3 days just to speak with an official who might help contact the American embassy. When I finally reached the front of the line, the government worker barely looked up from his paperwork. "No passport, no help," he stated flatly in accented English. "But I'm an American citizen," I explained desperately. "My documents were lost in the flood. I need to contact my embassy." He slid a form across the desk. "Fill this. Need proof of identity. Need witness from village. Embassy 300 kilometers south. No buses now because roads bad." This began a bureaucratic nightmare that would stretch for months. Each form required another form. Each official directed me to another office. Without money or identification, I slept in makeshift shelters with other displaced people, relying on charity for food. I finally caught a break when I met Lucas Parker, an Australian aid worker who offered to let me use his satellite phone. With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number, only to hear an automated message. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I tried Mason's number next. Same result. My own voicemail was full and inaccessible without my password. I used Lucas's limited internet access to try emailing both Mom and Mason. The messages bounced back with "address unknown," errors. My social media passwords, stored on my lost phone, were forgotten after years of autofill convenience. "Someone changing accounts, mate," Lucas suggested. "Happens sometimes when people presumed dead. Family close accounts, change numbers." The thought sent chills through me. Had they given up on me so quickly? It took another month to obtain temporary documentation from a regional government office. With Lucas's help, I made it to the capital city where the American embassy was located. There, new challenges awaited. Without anyone to verify my identity, the process of getting emergency travel documentation required extensive investigation. "We have procedures for situations like yours," the consular officer explained. "But verification takes time, especially with the communication issues in the affected region." I lived in a hostel near the embassy, working odd jobs to pay for my room and meals while waiting for my case to be processed. Every few days, I would try calling home from internet cafes, always with the same result: no connection. After nearly 6 months of bureaucratic wrangling, I finally received emergency travel documentation. The embassy arranged a basic flight back to the United States, scheduled for the following week. With my departure date approaching, I made one final attempt to research what had happened back home. Using a computer at the embassy's Citizen Resource Center, I searched for information about my family. Nothing came up for my mother's name. Mason's social media profiles were set to private. Then I thought of my high school friend Ethan Reed, who had always stayed connected with hometown news. Ethan's profile was public, and as I scrolled through his recent posts, my heart stopped. There was a photo of him dressed formally with the caption, "Congratulations to Sandra and Timothy on their engagement. So happy to see you finding joy again after such tragedy." My mother was engaged to Timothy. But what tragedy was Ethan referring to? I scrolled further back and froze. There was a post from 2 years earlier. "Remembering Garrett Wilson today. Still can't believe you're gone, brother. Your light was taken too soon." With trembling hands, I clicked on the comments. Mason had responded, "Thank you for honoring my brother's memory. Not a day goes by that I don't miss him. Taking care of Mom just like he would have wanted." The room spun around me. According to everyone back home, I was dead. And Mason was at the center of it all. The flight home was the longest 17 hours of my life. I alternated between rage, confusion, and disbelief. How had Mason convinced everyone I was dead? Why would he do this? The answer seemed obvious: money. My share of the inheritance would have reverted to him if I were legally declared dead. I landed in New York with nothing but my emergency documentation and the clothes on my back. Using the last of the money the embassy had provided, I bought a prepaid phone and called Ethan. His shocked silence when he heard my voice confirmed everything. "Garrett? This isn't funny," he finally managed. "Whoever this is a sick joke. It's really me, Ethan. I need your help. I can prove it's me. Remember when we stole Mr. Peterson's toupee in 10th grade and hid it in the cafeteria freezer?" There was another long pause. "Holy shit. Where are you?" 3 hours later, Ethan picked me up at a bus station near our hometown. His face went pale when he saw me, thinner than before, with a slight limp from my improperly healed leg and a scar running along my hairline. "You look like you've seen a ghost," I said, attempting humor. "That's exactly what I'm seeing," he replied, embracing me tightly. "Mason told everyone you were killed in a flood. There was a memorial service and everything. Your mom was devastated." Ethan took me to his apartment, explaining that I couldn't go home yet. If Mason had gone to such lengths to declare me dead, confronting him unprepared could be dangerous. We needed to understand exactly what had happened first. Over the next week, Ethan helped me piece together the story. Mason had initially reported me missing to local authorities after the flood made international news. He claimed to have received notification from the humanitarian organization that I was unaccounted for. When no body was found, he waited the minimum required time and then petitioned to have me declared legally dead. He had some official-looking death certificate from overseas, Ethan explained. Everyone believed it was legitimate. "It was forged," I said with certainty. "The local officials would never have issued a death certificate without a body." Through careful questioning of mutual friends, we learned that Mason had moved quickly to consolidate assets after my death. He had convinced my mother to grant him power of attorney while she was still deep in grief. Within months, he had liquidated my share of the business and investments. I reconnected with my old girlfriend Haley Martinez, who had attended my memorial service. She confirmed my suspicions about Mason's manipulation. "He changed all your mom's contact information," Haley explained during a secret meeting. "New phone, new email. Said it was to protect her from painful reminders. He even moved her to a new house, claiming the old one had too many memories." "Did she ever question why I disappeared so completely?" I asked, struggling to understand how my weekly calls had suddenly stopped without raising alarms. "Mason told everyone you'd been reckless," Haley said, looking uncomfortable. "That you'd gone to a dangerous area against advice, without proper preparation. He made it seem like you brought it on yourself. Your mom was too broken to question anything." The betrayal cut deep. While I had been fighting to survive and return home, my own brother had been systematically erasing me and profiting from my absence. I contacted Thomas Reynolds, our family's longtime attorney, requesting a confidential meeting. His shock matched Ethan's when I walked into his office. I never fully believed the death certificate, Thomas admitted after recovering from his surprise. The documentation seemed rushed, and Mason was too eager to execute the will. But without evidence of fraud, my hands were tied. Thomas helped me access financial records showing what had happened to my inheritance. Mason had sold my share of the business to a competitor at below market value, likely for a quick cash injection. The investment portfolio had been liquidated and transferred to new accounts in his name only. He had purchased a luxury home in an exclusive neighborhood and a sports car that cost more than most people earn in 5 years. What about my mother? I asked. Is she financially secure at least? She receives the monthly payments as stipulated in your father's will, Thomas confirmed. Mason couldn't touch those without raising red flags. And Timothy is quite comfortable financially from what I understand. Through careful investigation, we obtained copies of the falsified death documentation Mason had submitted. Thomas believed we had enough evidence to pursue both civil and criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. The final piece of the puzzle came from Maria Lopez, our family's longtime housekeeper who still worked for my mother part-time at her new residence. Your brother has all mail forwarded to his office first, Maria told me during a clandestine meeting arranged by Ethan. Once, about a year after you disappeared, a letter came from Southeast Asia. Mason took it immediately. Your mother never saw it. That explained why my eventual attempts to communicate had failed. Mason had created a perfect information blockade. With my mother's wedding to Timothy just 3 days away, I faced an agonizing decision. Should I confront Mason immediately, or wait until after the ceremony? After long discussions with Thomas and Ethan, I decided to wait until the reception. The ceremony itself should remain a joyful memory for my mother. She deserves at least that much happiness, I said, though the thought of watching from a distance broke my heart. Thomas helped me prepare a comprehensive evidence portfolio documenting Mason's fraud. Everything was in order, ready for whatever came next. The day before the wedding, I stood in Ethan's guest room, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back had been transformed by hardship and betrayal. But underneath the new scars and weathered appearance, I was still my father's son. Tomorrow, I promised my reflection, the truth comes out. The morning of my mother's wedding dawned bright and clear. I woke before sunrise, my mind racing with scenarios of what would happen later that day. Ethan found me sitting on his balcony, nursing a cup of coffee as the sky turned from gray to pink. You ready for this? He asked, joining me with his own steaming mug. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. We spent the morning preparing meticulously. Ethan helped me select appropriate attire from clothes we'd purchased the previous day. A navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and subtle tie. Nothing too flashy, but presentable enough for a wedding reception. You look almost like your old self, Ethan commented as I adjusted my tie. Almost, I agreed, running a hand over my shorter hair and the scar that now marked my temple. As I dressed, memories flooded back. My 10th birthday when Dad took me fishing at dawn. Mom teaching me to dance before my first school formal. Family movie nights with popcorn battles between Mason and me. The stark contrast between those happy memories and Mason's betrayal only strengthened my resolve. I rehearsed what I would say when I finally faced my mother and brother. Each scenario played out differently in my mind. Would Mom faint? Would Mason try to run? Would the guests believe me, or would they see me as an imposter crashing a happy occasion? Just speak from the heart, Ethan advised, sensing my anxiety. Your mom will know it's you the moment she sees you. At noon, I called Thomas for a final legal consultation. Everything is in order, he assured me. I've prepared the necessary injunctions to freeze assets if needed. Just call me when it's done, and I'll handle the legal aftermath. As the hour of the ceremony approached, doubts crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Should I have contacted Mom privately first? What if the shock was too much for her? You can still back out, Ethan said as we drove toward the church. Meet her tomorrow instead. I shook my head. No backing out now. Mason needs to face what he's done. We parked a block away from the small stone church where the ceremony would take place. From this distance, I could watch guests arrive without being noticed. The sight of familiar faces from my past life was surreal. Former neighbors, family friends, distant relatives all dressed in their finest, completely unaware of the truth they were about to witness. Then my mother arrived, stepping carefully from a white car, Timothy at her side. Even from a distance, I could see she looked happy, radiant even. Her dress was elegant but simple, befitting a second marriage. Timothy guided her with gentle attention, his affection obvious in every gesture. For a brief moment, I considered Ethan's suggestion. Maybe I should wait, let her have this perfect day. Then Mason arrived in his ostentatious sports car, the one purchased with my stolen inheritance. He stepped out wearing an expensive suit, playing the role of devoted son helping his mother remarry after tragedy. My hesitation vanished instantly. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. At 2:50, I slipped into the back of the church, keeping to the shadows of the vestibule. My appearance had changed enough that no one gave me a second glance, assuming I was some distant connection to the bride or groom. From my position, I could see my mother and Timothy at the altar, exchanging vows that emphasized honesty, trust, and new beginnings. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mason stood nearby in the front row, the picture of supportive family. After the ceremony concluded, guests filtered out to travel to the reception venue at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Ethan and I followed at a distance, parking in the far corner of the lot when we arrived. Last chance to reconsider, Ethan said as we watched the wedding party enter the elegant venue. I checked the evidence portfolio and my briefcase one final time. No. This ends today. We waited in the car as guests continued arriving. Through the venue's large windows, I could see the reception beginning. Tables decorated with white flowers, champagne being poured, the band playing softly in the corner. It was just as Mom would have wanted it. Simple, elegant, joyful. I texted Thomas that we were in position. His response was immediate. Standing by. Good luck. As the reception dinner began, I watched Mason stand to deliver a toast. Even through the window, his performance was convincing. He raised his glass, speaking animatedly, clearly praising the new couple. I couldn't hear his words, but I could imagine them. How he had supported Mom through her tragic loss. How pleased he was to welcome Timothy to the family. All while standing on the foundation of his elaborate lie. The formal dances followed dinner. Mom and Timothy took the floor first, followed by Timothy dancing with his adult daughter. The perfect time approached as the initial formalities concluded and the reception shifted to a more relaxed atmosphere. It's time, I told Ethan, stepping out of the car. We walked slowly toward the entrance, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The maitre d' at the door gave us a questioning look. I'm family, I said simply. Just running a bit late. He hesitated, then nodded, gesturing toward the reception hall. Ethan squeezed my shoulder in silent support as we paused at the doorway. Inside, the guests were mingling, the volume of conversation creating a pleasant buzz. Mason stood near our mother and Timothy, champagne glass in hand, laughing at something a guest had said. I took one final deep breath and stepped through the doorway, walking deliberately toward the center of the room. The moment of truth had arrived. The first person to notice me was an elderly aunt whose hand froze midway to her mouth, her champagne forgotten as she stared. Like ripples in a pond, the reaction spread outward. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses stopped clinking. The band played on, oblivious to the sudden shift in atmosphere. I continued walking forward, my eyes fixed on the head table where my mother sat with Timothy and Mason. Mom was looking down at her plate, unaware of the change sweeping through her reception. Mason was the second family member to see me. His face transformed in an instant from confident charm to shocked disbelief. The champagne glass he'd been holding slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor with a crash that finally cut through the band's music. The sound drew my mother's attention. She looked up first at Mason, then following his gaze across the room to me. Her expression cycled rapidly through confusion, shock, and disbelief. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice carrying in the now silent room. "Sorry I'm late." She stood shakily, one hand gripping the table for support. "It can't be," she whispered, though in the perfect silence, everyone heard. "Garrett?" Mason recovered quickly, stepping between us. "This is some kind of sick joke," he announced loudly. "Security! We have a wedding crasher." I maintained my calm, continuing forward. "It's no joke, Mason. I'm very much alive." Mom swayed dangerously, her face draining of color. Timothy reacted quickly, catching her before she could fall. As he supported her, his eyes locked with mine, filled with confusion and concern. "This man is an imposter," Mason declared, his voice rising with panic. "Some con artist who resembles Garrett. My brother died 3 years ago in Southeast Asia." I reached into my jacket and withdrew my emergency passport. "I have identification, Mom. It's really me. I didn't die. Mason lied to you." The guests murmured in confusion. Mom pushed away from Timothy, taking tentative steps toward me. "Your scar," she said, reaching toward my temple. "How did you get it?" "The flood," I answered. "I was injured trying to save a child. I woke up in a clinic miles away. I tried to contact you for months, but all our numbers had changed." Recognition dawned in her eyes. A mother knows her son, no matter how much time has passed or how his appearance has changed. "Garrett," she gasped, reaching for me with trembling hands. "My boy." As we embraced, she collapsed against me, sobbing uncontrollably. The room erupted in confused exclamations. Mason pushed forward, still trying to control the situation. "This is ridiculous. Anyone could have researched details about the flood. He's taking advantage of you, Mom." Timothy, showing remarkable presence of mind, addressed the stunned guests. "I think we need to give the family some privacy. Would everyone please move to the garden terrace? The staff will serve drinks while we sort this out." Most guests complied, though they cast backward glances filled with shock and curiosity. Close family friends and immediate relatives remained, forming a small circle around the unfolding drama. Timothy guided us to a private room adjacent to the main hall. Mom clung to my arm, as if afraid I might disappear again. Mason followed, his face contorted with barely controlled panic. "Let's all calm down and figure this out," Timothy suggested, closing the door behind us. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but you've clearly upset my wife on our wedding day." "He's a fraud," Mason insisted before I could speak. "My brother died years ago. We had confirmation from the authorities. There was a death certificate." I set my briefcase on a small table and opened it, removing the folder Thomas had helped me prepare. "The death certificate was falsified, Mason. You submitted it knowing I was still alive." Mom looked between us, her makeup streaked with tears. "Mason, what is he talking about?" I handed her the first document from my file. "This is my emergency documentation from the American Embassy, issued 3 months ago. I've been trying to get home since the flood, but I lost everything. My passport, phone, wallet. All of it washed away. Anyone can fake documents," Mason countered, but his voice lacked conviction. "What about this?" I produced printouts of the financial records Thomas had obtained. "These show how you liquidated my assets immediately after having me declared dead. $3 million, Mason. Was that what my life was worth to you?" Mom took the papers with shaking hands. "Mason? What did you do?" "He abandoned us," Mason shouted, his composure cracking. "He went off playing hero in some third world country and never bothered to call. What was I supposed to think?" I called twice in the first 2 weeks, I said evenly. Then the flood hit. I was unconscious for days. By the time I recovered enough to try contacting home again, all our numbers had been changed. Is that true? Mom asked Mason. Did you change our contact information? I was protecting you, Mason insisted. You were receiving calls from scammers claiming to have information about Garrett. It was cruel. I couldn't let you go through that pain. I withdrew another document from my file. This is a statement from Maria Lopez. She says a letter arrived from Southeast Asia about a year after I disappeared. You intercepted it, Mason. Mom never saw it. The color drained from Mason's face. Mom turned to him, her expression hardening from confusion to dawning horror. I sent emergency messages through every channel I could find. I continued. The embassy, the Red Cross, the humanitarian organization. None of them reached you because Mason made sure of it. You told me there was no hope. Mom whispered to Mason. You said the authorities were certain he was dead. Mason's tactics shifted to minimizing his actions. What was I supposed to do? You were devastated, Mom. The odds of him being alive after that flood were practically zero. I was being realistic. Realistic? I stepped closer to him. You forged a death certificate. You liquidated my assets. You bought a mansion and a sports car with my money. That's not being realistic. That's fraud. Mason's eyes darted to the door, calculating his chances of escape. Timothy, sensing his intention, moved subtly to block the exit. Mom, you have to understand, Mason pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. I had debts. Serious people were threatening me. When Garrett disappeared, I saw a way out. I never thought he'd actually come back. The admission hung in the air, damning in its implication. He had known I might be alive. He had deliberately built a life on the assumption I would never return to challenge his lie. Mom's face transformed. The confusion and shock gave way to cold fury. You lied to me, she said, each word precise and cutting. My son was alive, trying to come home, and you lied to me. I protected you from false hope, Mason insisted. What if I had told you there was a chance, and then he never came back? It would have destroyed you all over again. I reached into my file for the final piece of evidence. This is a copy of an emergency message I sent through the Red Cross 8 months after the flood. It was delivered to our old address and forwarded according to your instructions. You received it, Mason. You knew I was alive. Mom took the paper, reading the simple message I had written. Alive but injured. Lost documents. Working with embassy to return home. Please contact American Embassy in Capital City. Love, Garrett. Mason made a desperate lunge for the door, but Timothy's friends who had remained nearby blocked his path. He turned back, cornered, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. You don't understand what it was like, he shouted. Always living in his shadow. Dad's golden boy, the successful son, the one who could do no wrong. What about me? When was it ever going to be my turn? Mom stood straight, her grief hardening into resolve. Get out, she said quietly. Mom, please, Mason begged, his anger giving way to fear. Get out of my sight, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I can't even look at you right now. The attorneys will contact you tomorrow. Timothy nodded to his friends, who escorted a protesting Mason from the room. Through the door, I could see wedding guests watching in stunned silence as my brother was removed from the reception. When the door closed again, Mom collapsed into a chair, the emotional toll overwhelming her. Timothy knelt beside her, holding her hand, while I stood awkwardly nearby, suddenly uncertain of my place in this new configuration of our family. I tried so hard to get back to you, I said softly. Every day for 3 years. Mom looked up at me, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. My boy, she whispered. My beautiful boy is alive. She held out her arms, and I went to her, kneeling beside Timothy. The three of us remained there in that strange tableau. A bride and groom on their wedding day, comforting a son returned from the dead. The reception ended early, guests departing with whispered conversations and backward glances. Timothy announced that under the circumstances, they would postpone their honeymoon to Hawaii. No one questioned the decision. That night, I returned to my childhood home with Mom and Timothy. The house felt both familiar and strange, like a place visited in dreams but slightly altered upon waking. Many of Dad's things were gone, replaced by Timothy's possessions, evidence of their blended life together. We sat in the living room until dawn, my story spilling out in exhaustive detail. The flood, my injuries, the months of bureaucratic nightmare trying to return home. Mom listened with rapt attention, occasionally reaching out to touch my arm or face, as if confirming I was truly real. "I don't understand how Mason could do this," she said when I finished. "His own brother." "Money changes people," Timothy observed quietly. "And Mason always struggled with comparison." The next morning, Thomas arrived with additional legal paperwork. The process of reclaiming my identity and assets would be complicated but achievable. "Mason has disappeared," Thomas informed us. "His house is empty, and his phone goes straight to voicemail. He'll run as far as the money takes him," I predicted. For several weeks, we heard nothing from Mason. Mom alternated between grief over his betrayal and joy at my return. The emotional whiplash left her exhausted. Timothy proved to be a stabilizing presence, handling practical matters while Mom processed her feelings. The story attracted media attention despite our efforts to maintain privacy. Local newspapers ran headlines about the man returns from the dead. National outlets picked up the human interest angle. We declined all interview requests, focusing instead on rebuilding our family. "I feel so foolish," Mom confessed one evening as we sorted through old family photos. "How did I not question it more when you disappeared? A mother should know if her child is truly gone." "Mason manipulated everyone," I assured her. "He isolated you, controlled information. That's what abusers do." The word abuser hung in the air, harsh but accurate. Mason's actions had been a form of emotional abuse, calculated to benefit himself at others' expense. A month after the wedding, our private investigator located Mason hiding at a friend's lake house in upstate New York. Thomas immediately filed legal motions to freeze remaining assets and begin recovery proceedings. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, making the legal case straightforward. Mason initially attempted to counter with claims that he had sincerely believed I was dead. His defense crumbled when faced with the Red Cross message and other evidence showing he had actively prevented communication. During asset recovery investigations, we discovered the true extent of Mason's problems. Before Dad's death, he had accumulated gambling debts exceeding $500,000. Loan sharks had been threatening him for months. My death had been his salvation, providing immediate access to millions. The most difficult decision was whether to pursue criminal charges. Mom struggled with the idea of her son facing prison time. "He's still my child," she would say, tears in her eyes. Despite everything, we compromised by focusing on civil recovery while leaving criminal charges as leverage for cooperation. Family counseling became a weekly fixture as we navigated the complex emotions of betrayal, forgiveness, and reunion. 3 months after my return, Mason finally agreed to a meeting under his attorney's supervision. The encounter took place in Thomas's office, neutral ground for all involved. Mason looked diminished, his expensive clothes replaced by casual wear, dark circles under his eyes. He couldn't meet my gaze as we all sat around the conference table. "I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "I made terrible choices." "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it," I replied. "You stole 3 years of my life. You let Mom grieve needlessly. You took everything I had." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "I don't expect forgiveness." Mom reached across the table, not quite touching him but extending her hand nonetheless. "Why, Mason? I need to understand why." He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and defensiveness. It started small. Just intercepting that first message, telling myself I was protecting you from false hope. Then another came, and another. Each time, it got easier to justify. The money solved all my problems. I convinced myself Garrett was probably dead anyway, or that if he was alive, he had chosen to start a new life somewhere else. I was fighting every day to get home, I said. I know that now. Mason stared at his hands. By the time I fully accepted you might return someday, I was in too deep. The lie had become my reality. The meeting established initial terms for asset recovery. Mason would cooperate fully, surrendering remaining funds and property purchased with my inheritance. In exchange, we would not immediately pursue criminal charges, giving him an opportunity to demonstrate genuine remorse through actions rather than words. As weeks turned to months, we gradually recovered portions of what had been taken. The house Mason purchased was sold, with proceeds returning to me. His sports car and other luxury items went to auction. Financial forensics tracked down hidden accounts and investments. In total, we recovered approximately 60% of the original assets. Timothy unexpectedly became a mediating force between family members. His outsider perspective and natural diplomacy helped navigate tense situations. During one particularly difficult meeting, when I was ready to abandon negotiations and pursue maximum criminal penalties, Timothy pulled me aside. I understand your anger, he said. It's completely justified. But consider what your end goal is here. Do you want justice, revenge, or healing? Is it too much to want all three? I asked bitterly. No, he replied. But they rarely arrive simultaneously. His wisdom helped me separate my desire for punishment from my need for resolution. Gradually, I focused more on rebuilding my own life than on Mason's consequences. Mother struggled most with the divided loyalty between her sons. In private moments, she confessed her conflicted feelings. I'm overjoyed you're alive, she would tell me. But I also mourn what Mason has become. Is it possible to feel both emotions without one diminishing the other? I think that's what it means to be a parent, I suggested. Loving unconditionally while still acknowledging harm. By the 6-month mark after my return, I had re-established my professional credentials and found a new position with an engineering firm. My physical injuries had healed, though I would always walk with a slight limp during cold weather. The legal process continued its slow progression toward resolution. Mason, under strict conditions, began making restitution payments and attending mandatory therapy. His initial performative remorse gradually revealed deeper issues that had contributed to his actions. The competitive childhood, his feelings of inadequacy, the gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control. None excused his choices, but understanding the context helped us all process what had happened. As the 1-year anniversary of my return approached, we all recognized that while much had been restored, our family would never be the same. The trust between brothers had been shattered, perhaps irreparably. Yet somehow, we were finding a way forward, step by painful step. 1 year after my return, Mom and Timothy finally took their long-delayed honeymoon to Hawaii. The photos they sent showed them smiling on beaches, hiking volcanic trails, embracing under waterfalls. Mom looked younger somehow, the burden of false grief lifted from her shoulders. My own life had found new footing. I returned to engineering but with a different focus. The experience abroad had changed my priorities. Rather than pursuing corporate advancement, I established a small consulting firm specializing in sustainable water systems for developing regions. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very work that had separated me from my family now defined my new purpose. From the recovered inheritance funds, I established a foundation supporting disaster preparedness in flood-prone regions. Each grant included communication infrastructure designed to prevent others from being cut off as I had been. Turning personal tragedy into meaningful change provided healing I hadn't known I needed. Mason's path proved more complicated. The mandatory therapy revealed deep-seated issues beyond simple greed. His gambling addiction had been a symptom of broader problems with self-worth and validation. Understanding this didn't excuse his actions but provided context that helped me view him with something approaching compassion rather than pure anger. Under court supervision, he completed a rehabilitation program and began working for a construction company owned by one of Dad's old friends. The position came with strict financial oversight and modest pay. The sports cars and luxury lifestyle were gone, replaced by a small apartment and public transportation. His restitution payments would continue for 15 years. Our relationship remained fragile, defined by boundaries rather than brotherhood. We saw each other at family gatherings but rarely spoke directly. The weight of his betrayal created a chasm neither of us knew how to bridge. Yet somehow, seeing him stripped of pretense and working toward genuine accountability gave me hope that reconciliation might someday be possible, if never complete. The most remarkable transformation was in Mom. Her experience had forged unexpected strength. The woman who had once needed constant reassurance now spoke her mind without hesitation. Timothy's steady support allowed her to process both the joy of my return and the pain of Mason's betrayal without being consumed by either emotion. That Thanksgiving, we gathered at Mom and Timothy's home. The meal marked our first attempt at a normal family holiday since my return. Mason arrived last, carrying a homemade pie and a nervous expression. The conversation remained deliberately light, focusing on neutral topics. Timothy discussed his community volunteering. Mom shared stories from their honeymoon. I talked about my foundation's first successful project. When Mason hesitantly mentioned his 9-month sobriety chip from Gamblers Anonymous, Mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. A small gesture of acknowledgement rather than full forgiveness. Progress measured in millimeters rather than miles. After dinner, Mom insisted on a family photograph. For new memories, she explained as we arranged ourselves awkwardly in the living room. Timothy set the timer on the camera and hurried to join us. The resulting image captured our complicated reality perfectly. Mom and Timothy in the center, smiling genuinely. Me standing slightly apart, expression guarded but present. Mason on the opposite side, uncertainty in his eyes but making the effort to be there. Not a perfect family by any definition, but a family nonetheless. One shaped by betrayal and resilience, by lies and painful truths. The experience fundamentally changed my perspective on what matters in life. Before the flood, I had measured success in traditional terms. Career advancement, financial security, professional recognition. After losing everything, I realized those measures were largely meaningless. True wealth lay in authentic connections and integrity. Mason's elaborate deception had ultimately failed because lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the light of truth indefinitely. He had gained temporary wealth and status but lost his self-respect and family trust. The material gains proved hollow compared to what he sacrificed to obtain them. Mom captured this wisdom one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. In the end, she said, the only thing that really matters is being true to yourself and those you love. Everything else is just decoration. Timothy nodded beside her. Life's too short for facades. They may look pretty, but they can't withstand real storms. They had both lost spouses, grieved deeply, and found unexpected second chances. Their hard-earned wisdom resonated with my own journey back from the abyss. As for Mason, his story continues to unfold. The brother who once lived in my shadow then built a life on my absence now faces the challenging path of creating an authentic identity. Whether he will ultimately succeed remains uncertain. Redemption isn't a destination but a direction, and he's taken the first tentative steps. My own journey continues as well. The man who returned is not the same one who left 3 years earlier. The experience stripped away pretense and privilege, leaving behind someone more grounded in what truly matters. The scars I carry, both physical and emotional, serve as reminders of resilience rather than symbols of victimhood. The truth about families is that they're never as perfect as they appear from the outside. Every family harbors secrets, carries wounds, navigates complex dynamics. What distinguishes healthy families isn't the absence of problems, but how they face them together. Our family shattered under the weight of Mason's deception. Yet somehow, from those broken pieces, we're assembling something new. Not a perfect recreation of what was lost, but perhaps something more honest in its imperfection. So what would you do if someone built their life on a lie about yours? Could you find a path to forgiveness, or would you demand justice at any cost? The journey from betrayal to healing isn't straightforward, and everyone's path looks different. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, even the most carefully constructed lies cannot stand forever when confronted with truth.